Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Edythe Richards, thank you so much for being with us on this episode of People in Transition. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Edythe, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I am so pleased that you're starting with this question, Bob, because this is actually one of my most favorite questions. And it's one I actually ask my clients who are in career transition, because when we think back to who we were as a child, what our dreams were before we got quote unquote corrupted by the external world, as I like to say, I think it can give us a lot of clues as to the direction that we're headed. So I had several very nebulous ideas of things that I wanted to do. And these were ideas that were always changing because I'd get bored doing the same thing. So my first dream actually was to be a singer. And then I thought I wanted to be a teacher and a writer and work with animals in some way. I definitely wanted to travel and see the world, but I never had any specifics and I never really had a plan. And I think it's important to dig deep into these questions. What's the common denominator here? What is it about these particular childhood dreams that really energized and excited you? And for me, when I really stopped to ponder this question, for me, it's about motivating people. It's about helping people. If I'm being honest here, it's about performing because I love talking, but I love listening too. And I love making people happy and seeing them fulfilled.
What were the transition moments that occurred to you to get you from that picture of yourself as a people motivator, as a performer, to where you're at today?
Well, I've been helping people in transition for over 20 years as a counselor and as an educator. And I first became interested in career transition, especially because I never wanted to be defined as one person. And I never felt like I fit nice and neatly into a box. And I always admired people who knew exactly where they were going and what they wanted to do because I never felt like that was me. And I suppose I resented the fact that society seems to have this expectation of us to just know that this is the right path for us. So I ended up living overseas for a number of years, and I've been fortunate to have traveled to over 50 countries. And the more I've traveled and the more people I've spoken with, the more I realize that I am not alone in this feeling. Many of us reach adulthood without knowing what we want to be when we grow up. So in this early part of my career, I did a lot of work around career exploration, helping people to answer that question. What career path should I choose? How can I find the right work environment for my skills and my personality? And then as my own career progressed, I found a lot of satisfaction in helping people who had been downsized or laid off from their jobs. And sadly, many of these folks hadn't job searched for many years, and they were doing things like using outdated resume writing formats and not understanding today's job market and how things like applicant tracking systems and social media really affect the job search process. And then, of course, this whole experience of being let go from the job and the emotional effect that has on you. So helping people through those transitions was and is something that's deeply satisfying to me. And then, and then I found myself in the same situation, ironically. I got let go from my job. So I found myself going through this same range of emotions that I'd watched my clients go through and employing the same strategies that I encourage them to do. So I do understand what this is like from a very personal standpoint as well.
Edythe, I know that you're someone that is a significant proponent of emotional intelligence. Maybe you could tell our listeners, what is that all about and how does it have an impact in terms of job transitions?
Yeah, great question. So emotional intelligence it's a set of skills. It's not just one skill, but it's really a combination of various emotional and social skills that influence how we perceive and express ourselves, how we develop and maintain relationships, how we cope with challenges, and then how we use emotional information in a meaningful and productive way. So simply put, it's using the right emotion at the right time to produce the behavior that you want. And for your listeners here, I'd really like folks to encourage folks to stop and ponder that for a moment, using the right emotion at the right time. Very few of us really stop and think about the behavioral aspect of what it is that we're feeling inside and what that looks like to other people and how it affects our ability to obtain the things that we want. So in terms of how this has worked in transition, especially career transitions. So when I got certified as an emotional intelligence practitioner and trainer, it was really an aha moment for me because as I started learning more about emotional intelligence or EQ, I started to realize that this is what helps people through transitions. This is what helps people succeed. And it's also what inhibits our success. This combination of skills is what can make or break us. Emotions drive everything we do, whether we're conscious of them or not. It really means that when we're aware that emotions drive our behavior and impact people, both positively and negatively, we can learn how we can manage those emotions, both our own and those of other people. So it's really amazing to me when we start to use these skills, we do see change and we see good change. So integrating emotional intelligence into my work as a career counselor and also as a corporate trainer and leadership coach is something I've been doing for many years now and helping my clients to develop their emotional intelligence, I would say is perhaps more important than actually helping them to write their resumes or understand the modern job search process.
Edythe, how do you think this notion of emotional intelligence played out when you were in transition? How did it play out for you in a good way? And maybe on the other side of that, how did it play out maybe in not so positive a way to assist you in your transition?
Yeah, so if I can speak for a moment about my own job search process when I got laid off from my position. This is a time in your life when you're really forced, whether you like it or not, to take a good hard look at who you are and ask yourself some of these tough questions. And the job search and just being downsized, it's one of these times in our lives when we really do want to make a good impression and put our best foot forward. In terms of how I've seen this play out with other job seekers, I think just being given that vantage point was really beneficial to me when I went through it myself, because I've worked with many job seekers over the years, and I'm sure you have too in your work, Bob, who are oblivious about the impression that they're making. And worse, they don't want to believe any negative feedback that they receive. So they get into this cycle of bad behavior, and it's a very sad thing for me to witness. So just being aware of having watched people go through this and what happens to them, it was eye-opening to me, because it helped me to not go down those unhelpful paths, I guess I can say. And in terms of how that's helped me when I've worked with clients, I've been in situations where I've had to tell people that they haven't been successful in their job search because of A, B, or C. And sometimes the reaction is for them to get defensive or even angry. And when this happens, I have to remind myself to listen patiently and quietly, and remind them that what I'm sharing is my opinion, but it's based on what you've told me. And it's also based on certain behaviors I've observed. And then they have two choices. You can either be pissed off at me about the feedback that I'm giving you, or you can listen, and I mean really, really listen, and consider whether my perception is indeed reality, and then learn from that and figure out how to make it not happen again. And so just having observed these types of interactions, it's just been helpful in building my own self-awareness, how I'm being perceived both positively and negatively for other people. And that's, I believe, what's helped me spur my career forward.
You spoke of people having maybe less than desirable results from their job search. What's been the most common problem areas that you've seen people struggle with when they are in transition?
I think for one thing, we are constantly looking for feedback, but we don't like what we hear if it's negative. That's human nature, and it's our ego protecting us. But what many of us fail to do is to move past that. Sure, it hurts to hear negative things about yourself, but we want to remember, first of all, that all feedback is subjective. You have to decide for yourself if that feedback is accurate, and then you have to decide if you're going to do something about it. And if so, what are you going to do?
Edythe, what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about the job market? What do your clients just don't get about being out there looking for a new position?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that, first of all, by and large, as a human population, we don't like change. It's not comfortable, and it's unpredictable. And what's going to be more unpredictable and uncomfortable than being in the midst of a job search, right? So, as a human population, I think we tend to be very low on flexibility and agility. So, let me give you an example. So this past year it's been a real test of our flexibility. It's been stressful. And when we're stressed, we naturally want to regain a sense of control so that we can get back into our comfort zones. And I'm sure you've seen this. When people lose their jobs, they may desperately try to regain control. But in doing so, they ironically become more and more rigid. And of course, that just makes things worse. In today's world, especially, it's really important to be agile. We don't know, for example, if there's going to be another variant of COVID. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy. There's a lot that we can't control. But what we can control is our own behavior. So to the listeners who are tuning in here, who feel like they may need to, work on their flexibility or become a more flexible person, or if you've gotten feedback that, maybe you're too set in your ways or your beliefs or your behaviors, I would encourage people to try to be conscious of being open to new information. Don't try to close yourself off so much. Try to change something small in your daily routine, even if it's just driving a new route home from work, or trying a different flavor of ice cream.
I read something the other day that I'm curious what it means to you. The quote said, "During your transition, it is an especially good time to take a fresh look inward." What does that mean to you?
I think we, as a human populations, and maybe we especially as Americans, we tend to equate our identities with our job. And in the past year and a half has really kind of blurred the lines between our personal and our professional lives. So I think that's something really important for us to consider. A lot of people say they can't wait until they retire, but they may forget that their identities are wrapped up in their careers. And then if something unexpected happens and you lose a job, I'm sure we all know people who have lost their jobs due to COVID, and that can make us question our identities too. So to me, that statement is more of a reminder that I don't I don't want to let my work define me. I want to continue to have multiple identities. That's what it means for me.
Data shows that men are more often offered jobs based on charisma and their potential, while women have to prove they have actually already done the job itself. This difference makes it oftentimes more difficult for women to switch industries, get promoted, gain new skills, and sometimes even their inability to get an interview with a company. What is your experience with that difference that exists, and how do you coach women to overcome this obstacle?
I think managing any transition, whether you're a man or a woman, I mean, first of all, you're going to have your own unique strengths, challenges, and it's going to be different for everybody. Everybody has a different challenge, right? But if we are trying to find the kind of common denominators here, I think first and foremost, we need to all spend some time getting to know ourselves, getting a clear understanding of what our strengths and our weaknesses are, and asking for honest feedback from others. And if we're hearing the same negative feedback again and again, we want to do something about it. Got a little story here about this. I've got a friend who is a lovely woman, but she can be pretty snarky and argumentative sometimes. And more than most people, she can't handle being wrong. I mean, we know people like this. They just need to be right all the time. And I think she doesn't always realize how she comes across to other people. So she's sought out feedback from our group of friends, and all of us have told her that this is something she needs to work on, because she's actually driving people away personally and professionally. And it took a while for her to accept our feedback, but I'm pleased that she's recently taken some active steps to be less aggressive. She's admitted that the quality of her relationships has improved as a result. So I think in her case, she wasn't willing to look deep inside herself at first and develop that self-awareness. And she wasn't also willing to be humble and change herself. But once she did, things got much better. So I think this story, it's definitely something that can be applied to multiple areas of our lives.
Edythe, a transition coach friend of mine, recently told me the important thing is to recognize during a transition is that you're going to experience emotional volatility, and it's natural and usually unavoidable to have that emotional volatility. What do you think he was trying to say there?
I think if I can relate that to emotional intelligence, first, I think it's important that we understand our own emotions, because if we are oblivious to our emotions, they're going to control us rather than we controlling them. So definitely working on that, developing self-awareness and developing an understanding of how we handle our emotions. Emotions don't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but they can derail us if we let them. So it's very important to be first aware of them and then to control them so they don't control us. And I just have to ask this question related to your question. I think people need to think about how dangerous it can be to not be in touch with your feelings. Our feelings and how we manage them, our emotions are the key to successful relationships, both personally and professionally.
Edythe, what do you coach your clients to help them remain focused during their transition? Because job search can be a lonely, frustrating, humbling experience. How do you help them stay focused during that time?
It definitely can be humbling. And I think, again, having a good idea of your strengths and challenges, really that's key. And if you do have that piece, the rest is going to be pretty easy. But with that said, everyone does have a different challenge staying focused. Some people really do need structure, and they will do best with a set routine every week. Some people don't work well this way, and they'll approach a transition with a more flexible mindset and attitude. The real question we want to ask ourselves is, am I getting the results that I want? And if we are, we're doing something right. And if we're not, it's time to change tactics. I think we also want to think about what our transition is like for the people around us. And again, this is not something I think a lot of people stop to really ponder and think about, especially a job or a career transition. And I can't stress this enough. What's your family telling you that you're doing well and that you're not doing well? Are you giving yourself enough time to enjoy the things that make you happy? Are you putting in time for regular exercise and sleep? Are you paying attention to your health? All of these things can either help or hinder our efforts.
Talk about that health issue. How do you think health impacts you and your success or failure as you're going through a transition?
Well, I'm thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs here. So once you have your physical needs met and then your security needs met, that's kind of the baseline there to move up the pyramid to get your emotional needs met there.
Edythe, for many, work looks different today than it did 6 months, a year ago. And even people who are employed are dealing with a lot of uncertainty and stress and concern. Any suggestions to those people on how to cope with the huge changes that are taking place in our work, in our private lives today?
I've really been pondering this question myself lately. And I keep coming back to this thought that regardless of all the changes we've seen in the past 6 months to a year, we're still living in a very data-driven world. And people are placing emphasis on tangible achievements and markers. And this is sometimes it's easy to think that that's more important than our own internal sense of accomplishment. And this is my own somewhat biased opinion here, but I think that there's this over focus on data, and it's come to at a great expense. And what we're seeing now is a point where we're in danger of rejecting anything that can't be measured. So anything that's subjective, including things like empathy, spirituality, loyalty, and even emotions. And our school systems are prime examples of this with standardized testing, performance reviews in the workplace. We test and measure anything that can be tested and measured, and that includes our own career paths. So I think what I'm really getting at here is that being successful in your career path doesn't have to be measured in tangible terms. And I'd say that there's some questions that your listeners may want to ask themselves to gauge where they are right now with their lives. Am I happy with my life now? Am I proud of myself? Am I proud of my accomplishments? Am I doing my best to make this world a better place? And the big one here, do you see progress? We may not see a lot of big leaps or data-driven accomplishments in our career, but if we're moving forward and we're evolving and we're not stuck in the status quo, I would say that's definitely a good thing, especially in these unpredictable times.
Edythe, what advice do you have on learning new skills while you're in transition? maybe Excel or communications or some other new area in addition to working on your job search. Any thoughts, any counsel on that?
Absolutely. I am a huge proponent in always continuing to learn and to grow. And once you have done that hard work and if you're considering a career, a big career change, for example, you may find that you do need to pursue another degree or certification or a skill set that you don't currently have. And that may take more time than what you originally intended, especially if you're changing careers, if you're making a huge leap. And I think the pandemic's caused a lot of us to reconsider our career paths. So very valid question for today's world. But with that said, I think whether people are making a huge leap in their careers or they're just considering moving to a new workplace, in terms of the job search, there are a lot of technical aspects to the job search that are going to be the same. For example, we still need to have an active, updated LinkedIn profile and a targeted resume. The skills that you might be targeting could be different. The areas of your background that you're targeting might be different. So some of these technical aspects, they're going to be the same no matter who you are, though.
Edythe, you mentioned that losing your job, being in transition, can have an emotional impact on the individual. Any tips or techniques to rebuild or maintain at least the self-confidence that you have while you're in your job transition?
When I lost my job, one of the most important things that helped me was to take some time to grieve the loss. And this meant processing a range of emotions, from anger to depression and everything in between. I even remember giving myself permission to feel sorry for myself for a day or two. Another thing that really helped me was processing my feelings externally with friends or family members and my significant other. And this worked well for me because I'm an extrovert and I'm also a very relationship centric person. But I think that everyone has his or her own way to process this kind of emotional roller coaster that we might be going through. And there's not necessarily one strategy that's going to work for everybody. And there's not always one time frame that will work for everyone either. Some people are just going to take longer to get through difficult events than other people. But I think that no matter what your individual challenges are, I think it's important to be both kind to yourself, but also to be realistic and really ponder this question of what's working well for you now and what's not working so well. What do you need to do better? And then take some kind of action so that you can get better. And of course, you're going to need to be patient. So thinking about career transitions in a post-COVID world is probably going to take longer than average to find a new job. And you may find yourself taking one step forward and two steps back. But again, if your overall progress is moving forward, that's definitely a good thing.
Any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone who's going through their own personal transition?
So a couple of books that I've read recently that really speak to life transitions. Think Again by Adam Grant and Insight by Tasha Eurich. Both speak to the importance of developing emotional intelligence. In Tasha Eurich's case, it's about developing self-awareness. And in Adam Grant's case, it's about thinking again and keeping an open mind. And then, of course, all of Brené Brown's work on empathy, it's so applicable to today's world and so very needed. I have a couple of really good free resources on my website, atopcareer.com. And especially for people who are in that career exploration phase there, I have a couple of really good articles with questions that can help you gain some clarity. And I have a couple of podcast series on the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, Myers-Briggs Question Corner, and then another podcast series called EQ at Work, and both are available on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.
If our listeners only remember three things as they go through their transition, What are those 3 things, Edythe, that you want them to take away with them?
Pause, reflect, and choose. This is something I say to myself multiple times a day, and it's something I encourage everybody to repeat to themselves. So pause. So before you do or say something you're going to regret, stop. Pause your brain. Pausing for 3 seconds or 5 seconds or 10 seconds. This allows you to refocus. And this may be really hard for some people, especially people who are always on the go or who quickly. And I can certainly understand that. My brain tends to move very quickly. I like to finish things quickly. And sometimes I'm not very good at taking breaks. But our bodies and our minds need breaks. And this doesn't mean we're being lazy. And this can apply to a lot of different areas of our lives. Before we make a big decision or before we have a tough conversation, and especially when we're in the heat of the moment. So pause, reflect. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Take some time to really ponder that. And this is another way that can help develop our self-awareness. What emotion are we really feeling? And what's the cause of that emotion? And very important, what does that feeling look like and sound like to other people? And then finally, choose your behavior. Choose how you're going to represent yourself. Emotions are universal, but behavior is a choice. And there's so much in life, especially nowadays, that we can't control, but our behavior is one of the only things that we can control.
Edythe Richards, thank you so much for all of the great advice, for the vulnerability that you showed in describing your own transition, and for shining the light in terms of our future paths and how we can be successful with emotional intelligence going forward. I appreciate all your thoughts and insights.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Bob.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.